Hey, Ben here with Studio on the Lake. This is number 2 of the Carousel Seahorse. That's kind of where we left him on the last round. I had started putting in the scales, and if you don't want to watch the rest of the thing, there's how he ended up. And he is in my Etsy shop at Ben Studio on the Lake. If you search that, one word, Ben Studio on the Lake. He's over there, as well as the sparrow. I threw it up on the Etsy. So hopefully I can get rid of some of these carvings laying around. So we carved all the scales in, and they're a little bit rough. Now I'm going to go down and smooth each individual scaled out with the that's a little diamond taper burr, or flame burr, I guess. So I will do each scale here, and then come back again with the wood burner and delineate him just a little bit more. And they will end up being, when I'm all done, quite smooth, because they're going to get painted, and we don't want a whole lot of that to read through on the paint. So here's drawing the scales in around the eye. I'm kind of going with the flow. You notice that I left a ridge around that eye. Putting back in the bridle and the medallions that, or buckles, or whatever the heck you call them. I don't know what happens on there. You'll notice on this, and I don't know if I put it in here or not, I did carve, I was carving on the nose of this guy, and I don't remember if it's in the last video or not, probably is. As I was carving the inside of it, the burr broke out a portion of it, so you can see where the dark wood joins the lighter wood there. I just sawed it off and glued another section on the end there. So putting in the ears, and I kind of wanted the ears to be to have a little thin ridges up through those. And when I was carving this, I originally had drawn those in, and then I'd brought it in the house. I don't know, when I was filming the one I hadn't finished carving, and my wife said, "Hey, you took the fins out of the ears. You shouldn't have done that. You need to put them back." And I had every intention of putting them back. It's just that they had gotten smoothed out from the reference lines. So I'm coming back in with the burner, and you'll notice I use that burner like a pencil. And that I run that on, it's fairly hot. It's a 6.5 out of 10 on it. And I use an Ultima combo power carver and burner set. Actually use 2 of them. This one has a chisel point on it. And if you're curious about that, I'll give you the numbers. Just leave me a comment or send me an email. Down, the links are down below. But I'm not setting those real deep, but I use those as a stop cut line, and then I'll come back over with the burr. People have asked on the birds if it's better to stone the feathers in or use the burning pin in there, and the answer to that is I won't show you that on sparrows or this, but if you're doing detail work on the wings and the tail, and you're trying to get a lot of feather lines in a feather that's exposed, or changes a drastic direction, it's best to be done with the burning pin. Once you paint it, if you intend to paint it, those will read through. You can do the same thing with a little ceramic stone or a diamond stone. It's just that you don't have quite as much control over the stone and getting the lines in there. So a lot of times I'll show you on the decoys, I'll go ahead and stone the better part of the body, that's to include the head, and I can cut those feathers in, and then I'll show you at that point when I paint over them, that you really can't tell the difference. The couple birds that are up now in the bird series, and this is the first of the Carousel series, those were done with the burner intentionally to be left unpainted, or paint highlighting a couple of those feathers. So long story short, that's the difference. I found that sometimes when I first started doing this many years ago, I would burn in a beautiful feather pattern and then paint it, and it seemed to me that a lot of stuff was lost, that you covered up a lot of the paint. I really haven't done a lot with the pyrography and that sort of stuff with just a wood burning pen, but I thought it looked better before it was painted, and in a lot of cases now I tend not to paint and just let the wood do its thing. And then I discovered that little trick of brushing it with a brass brush, and it takes away a little bit of the carbon and lets you see what you've got, and then you can burn a little bit deeper. So painstakingly all the way around the nose, scales of different shapes. I've talked about realism before. If you use the same, well, you can't really use the same scale pattern. You could on this, you could lay those in there, but as you notice, they overlap each other, and part of one will show and part of another one not necessarily will show as much. So if you used a pattern, you'd have to have several patterns, because they need to get bigger as they go down the body, and then the smaller ones up in the top. You can see how you would drive yourself nuts if you're trying to lay a pattern in here. To me, it's easier just to freehand those in, and it gives it a little bit more realism. As real as this can be. This is, of course, a completely mythical creature. You saw how I went about and developed him. And I'm really only concentrating, I'm only going to torture you on the carving of one side of this. The other side, the carving, is pretty much the same. So now I'm putting in those fins, fins or ridges or whatever the heck they are, on the inside of the ear, which almost doubles as a fin, I guess, if you think about it. So I'll put in the one side, and then I'll tilt that burner just a little bit and come back in and do the other side. It's kind of funny. When I was painting this guy, when I paint these, I paint over the eyes. I ignore the eyes altogether as far as painting, and that does two things. One, it gets the paint down around the eye in the cracks and the crevices, so you don't have any little bits showing when you do that. And that being glass eyes, you just take a knife when you're all done with the painting and scrape the eyes off, and you be careful when you get down to the point where the paint is, so you don't scrape back into wood or anything. But you can paint right over these glass eyes, and you can't really scratch them with a knife. And this guy, when I was painting him, he had several coats of paint on there, base coats, darker. And as I was painting him, I was soliciting advice from the wife on what color next, or color to use for a compliment on that. And then I cleaned the eye off, and she said, "Oh wow, you painted I thought you'd carved a wooden eye in there. Didn't realize you had a glass eye in there." But that's kind of the last thing you do when you're painting. And you can see now that I've got a small ruby or sapphire bit in there, and I'm just kind of contouring out those small scales across the face. A lot of this detail is going to be lost in the painting. You certainly could have left that smooth and then painted these scales in, but part of the fun of carving, of course, is to go overboard. I haven't smoothed down the bridle or anything on that. Everything's in the rough stage at this point. And you can see I kind of went back and put the contour of the face back in. A lot of this is ran at 2 times the speed. That just keeps you can still see what I'm up to and what I'm doing. I'm going back and kind of straightening that bridle out a little bit and getting the flow down in there. I hadn't decided what I wanted to do on those medallions. A lot of different things. Of course, you can carve circular rings on there, delineate them, or you could just let the paint do it. You could carve a flower in there, and then a lot of these on the real carousel animals of olden days would have a tassel hanging down from each of those, and I didn't carve any of those in this one. I probably will on another carousel animal. The one thing I doubt I'll do is a carousel horse. Even though I grew up on a ranch, my relatives are all ranchers. I like horses, but I don't see any reason to draw them or paint them or carve them. In the carousel world, the menagerie animals and the made-up animals and that sort of stuff are a lot more intriguing to me, as well as some of the carriages and that sort of thing. This one is smaller and decorative. It'll go in the corner somewhere on a shelf. It's a knick-knack, for lack of better reference. Serves no purpose whatsoever other than maybe a conversational piece. Should be a couple videos up today if you're watching these in order. This will probably be the first one. I've done the editing on part 2 of the sparrow and the bird series and the finishing of that. And for some reason on there, Jordy caused trouble again, and he said, "Hey, please carve a spirit bird." And I had to think about it, and I didn't know where to go on that, because obviously the old man spirit, which Jordy does so well, Jordy over at Carving Fusion, he's the master of spirit faces and wood and that sort of thing, and logs and cottonwood bark, which he thankfully sent me a whole bunch, and you'll see that. I'll put that video. I did went ahead and played with a couple of different ideas, and you'll get to see that later today if I get that editing up and done. And it turned out kind of interesting, and I think I'm going to turn that into kind of a challenge to him and Rob and maybe Calvin over there, Mark the Maker. Anybody who wants to get on it, just send me a comment, and I'll include you in that, and we'll do the one of the ludicrous things, a bird spirit, and we'll see where different people take that. So stand by for that video later today. Like I said, if you want to get involved in it, anybody that's carving and putting YouTube videos up, just shoot me a email or a comment down in there, and I'll add you in as we go along and see where that thing takes us. You remember the spirit fish fiasco, which really kind of started all of us together in this, and the support of the carving community that's grown from Jordy and myself and Just Carve Rob, Mark the Maker, various different folks. So you saw I did come back in and burn those again. I will go one more time on them, and now I'm cutting in the saddle cinch strap on the bottom of that. This guy, I don't know if you guys are familiar with horses. Anybody out there is familiar with horses. I had a old horse called Dollar in the old days, and he was my horse for many years. And he got smart. When you'd start to cinch that cinch strap up around his belly, he'd take in a big old breath. And if you cinched it down tight while he was holding his breath, then you went to get on and ride, your saddle would start sliding off on the side. So my grandfather did a lot of work with horses, was known as quite the horseman around. And what you do, it seems kind of cruel, but he'd take a big old breath and then you punch him in the belly and make him let out his breath, and then you go ahead and tighten up the cinch. So horses get smart. And I don't know if this seahorse is that smart. So this back thing there, in case you're wondering what it is, I kind of threw it in there underneath. A lot of times on the carousel stuff, a lot of the fanciful stuff would be either in a blanket that would go on there, a horse blanket for lack of a better reference. But this guy's got a little saddle bag back there and on the back, and then sitting underneath the back of the saddle are two scrolls or two blankets for lack of better reference, and they're rolled up, just sitting under there. So now I'm going back and setting in the saddle. You'll remember in the first video, this could have been a double-seater, and would have had two saddle shapes in the middle of it. This, I cut it in half, as you can do with any of your carvings at any point. Chop them up, put them back together. And if you notice on the top there, I did leave that ridge in for the pole. I had a pretty good idea that it wasn't going to stay there, and it doesn't. When you see me put the pole in later on, the pole turned out to be a little bit bigger than the material that I left. One of the things about carving is it's subtractive. You take stuff away, and once you take it away, it's hard to put it back. And one of the challenges in carving is trying to leave blocks or portions of the carving blocked out, so that you can carve whatever you wanted into that or had planned onto that later on. And you can kind of see that on the back of this. I left a lot of stuff in there. Now I'm setting the saddle in. I've got the shape on the front, and the back I left alone to carve a little bit later. There's two reasons for that. One, carousel animals have a romance side. If you were to buy a $100,000 carousel horse, or if you get a chance to go to some of the carousels still around in the various different parks. I mean, there's Central Park, there's some around New York, down in Philadelphia, that sort of stuff. There's still old-fashioned carousels operating, original ones. Used to cost a nickel to ride, and now, from the looks of it, their information I can find is $3 a token. So it went from a nickel to $3 to ride a carousel and the ride lasts 2 or 3 minutes. But if you get on that carousel or hold the kid on there, look at the backside of the horses, the menagerie animals. They'll be carved to the shape, but a lot of them won't have any of the detail that's on the front. They called that the romance side. So if you're staring at a carousel in America, the carousel comes in from your left and goes out to your right. So the right side of the animal, as you're staring at it, head would be facing to the right side, and that's the direction they go. Now if you go over to England, which really kind of started the carousels, just like the way they drive on the wrong damn side of the road, their carousels run backwards. So the horse is turned around and the head is facing to the left as you're staring at the carousel, and it travels in that direction. And that would be the difference between the English and the American carousel. So as you can see, I'm coming back down now, and I'm getting ready to put the scales in on the back of him when I finally got the shape relatively down. So I'm coming through and outlining the various different parts and pieces in preparation to sand all of that down with a diamond burr or smooth it down. And you'll notice I didn't do that on purpose, but the scroll on the blankets gets smaller and kind of curves around, gives it kind of a natural look. I didn't do that on purpose. It just happened to come out that way. I wasn't paying attention on how straight I was carving. So he's starting to get the various parts and pieces set in there. That's a little portion, a little detailed piece, and it's going to go into the scroll or roll of that blanket there, and that's what I'm cutting in right now. It's those little details that make all the difference. You can do this with paint, but it's not quite the same. And I had to think what direction I wanted these scrolls to go in. In the 20s and 30s, it was quite a thing to get a carousel to come to your town. A lot of these carousels, not the big ones nowadays, are permanent and they're fixed in the various parks. Someone purchased the carousel, restored it, and operates it. But a lot of times these were made to be put on a truck, and they would tear it down, tear all the animals off, tear the mechanism apart, and then they would travel to a town and set up there for 3 or 4 days and get all the money from the kids out of that town, and then they would pack up, kind of like the carnies did, and then they would move on. So it was quite a thing to see a carousel come to town, and they used them. They traveled around and whatnot. I've talked about the carvers before. We carve now, those of us here. There are a couple people out there that are professional carvers, obviously, and make a living doing this. And some excellent ones out there. But primarily we do this as a hobby nowadays. But in those days it would be like being a plumber or an electrician. That's what you did. You had your tools and you went on down the line. It's like the mechanics in my EMS business, the helicopter EMS business. We have a mechanic at all the bases, and they have to have their own tools, just like a lot of auto places will require the mechanics to bring their tools. So if you were a carver, you'd have your tools and roll with them. If you were putting in a big fancy staircase or doing somebody's bedroom that had a lot of detail work going on it. I do have a center line on the tail, on the reference, and you can watch me turn this thing around and around and work in various different portions. And he's getting down. You can see well, there we go. I just put in another one where I want that flow to go down in there, and I'll carve up to that line and round it over, and usually don't take the line away until everything gets to be where I want it to be. Time in this guy, probably with the painting, probably 12 hours. I tend to carve in the morning. Since I retired from the military, I get up still pretty early in the morning. Getting later now, 5 o'clock, 5:30. But I'll get my coffee. I'll go out to the studio because it's cold in northern Wisconsin here, and I don't have heat out there, or at least continual heat, and no electric heat. It's a big pot-bellied stove that came off of a caboose on a train. Does a nice job. Takes it about a half an hour to take the temperature from 5 degrees up to 65, 70. And then as I keep stoking it and carving, it'll get quite toasty in there. And seems counterintuitive, but if it gets too hot, I can open up a window, crack a window a little bit as a means of regulating the temperature in there, and not put as much in the fire. Has a terrible dampener in it, and I tend to run it wide open. So there's the tail, and I left a little ridge on the outside. It's kind of a fish tail fin, And now I'm going to come back just like on the ears and leave those pieces in the center. And that's a ruby bit in there, taper, my second favorite bit probably. And it does a nice job of cutting if you want to put some pressure on it, or you can use it very lightly and it leaves almost a sanded complete finish. And it has that point that you can get down in there, and it also has the ball on the back side of it that you can get really start to go to town. So there's cutting in between the fins. The fin obviously would not be straight on the bottom. And you can see that I'm cutting some down the membrane in between those little, I don't know, spines that are on there. And you can see it's still pretty thick. I'll take a little bit of that away when I do the final shaping. So there he is, and I hope, if I remember correctly, because I edited this a couple days ago and didn't do the voiceover part of it, but now I'm coming back in and putting in the scales. It doesn't look like I drew them in. I don't think I did. We'll have to see if we get some pencil lines in here. But I use this just like a pencil, and I wouldn't necessarily follow the penned in scales. And you can see the backside is not done. You're not going to get to see that. I have no reason to torture you. These things are long enough as it is. I do have lines showing the center of these, and I am watching and drawing these, or yeah, I guess you could say drawing them in with the wood burner pen, following the curve of the tail. You have to be careful when you get to, you have to know how you're going to do that next scale as you get to the center there. If you're not going to do it 360 all the way around, you got to be careful when you put that one scale on the top in. Otherwise, you'll do the scales on the back, and they won't meet in the middle there. This is exactly the same process for putting feathers on a bird. Scales and feathers are the same in my book. And some of the dragons, if I get back to doing those later this year, they have the same thing. Now you can change these scales from a round to a diamond or whatever shape appeals to you. You can get pretty fancy with them. These are just straightforward ovals. And as they get towards the bottom, obviously they need to be a little bit smaller. And poof, just like magic, that you can see how they taper down to nothing on that. And there'll be about three passes in there, probably 3 or 4 passes. So you can see him laying in my lap. This is the sparrow, and I finished burning the tail, and I got bored with it and picked up a piece of wood that looked like a sparrow. I thought it was a cutoff. I didn't intentionally cut him out, and that became the sparrow video that's going right now, and you'll see part 2 of that later today. But sometimes I'll get tired of carving one piece, and you can see I've went ahead and done the work on the back side of him also. But I'll get bored and put the piece down. So here's a curtain rod that was painted gold, and it came out of, I don't know, one of the houses over the years. But I've got a series of them. There's a bunch of them. I collect that stuff. Because that would be a $20 brass rod, but that one actually is steel. But someone painted it a bronze or a gold color. And I'm going to use that to go into the base. So here's the base. I'm just going to round it over. If it wasn't cold and I had access to the big shop out at the woodlot, I would have probably grabbed a router and ran over that. So here's a piece of that steel and it's fairly soft, and I should have taken it over to the lathe, little Sureline lathe over there, and chucked it up and done this finial or ball on the top and the ring, but I didn't. I just did it with the cutoff wheel, which is about the only thing I use from Dremel. But here's a little needle file, and cleaning that up. And I didn't try to make it perfect. The danger in making these things perfect is you really gotta to go from handmade to a professional finish look on there. Any little imperfection in it, if you've got the whole thing looking pretty good, will really read and show. If you leave it all kind of handmade looking, you don't have to worry about that. So now I'm trying to figure out where I want to drill the hole in this guy to put him on this stand. And the angle, I am going to attach the tail to the base. So there's the angle that I want to drill down through that. And you're going to see that little nub on there that I have when we get, I didn't show me drilling through that thing, because it'll break your heart watching you cut down there. So now the pole is set into him, and you can see that I lost in the little bit of corner up on the saddle there. I lost that ridge that I left out. I want the tail to be attached. I talked about it on the shorebird sitting on a pole. If it's not wood, eventually it will start to spin on there. So I wanted the tail to be glued down to the base, and I'm just putting a little ridge where that tail would sit down in there, so that I can attach it with the glue. And you can see me moving it back and forth and getting it set down there where I want it. So this guy's going to get painted with acrylics. And probably a 3 or 4 hour paint job on him. And I'm happy with how he's setting down on that and the angle of the pole. You saw me measure that part. I'm not going to paint the pole. I'll leave it light steel or silver, and then I'll just glue these in with super glue. Now, if you didn't mount the tail, eventually the glue around the pole would break, and this guy would spin around and around. If someone picked him up, he would start to spin on that base. There's a way to get around that. You can cross drill through that pole right down there at the bottom and into the top of his body, and put a little pin in there that sticks out at a 90-degree angle, and pin it so that it doesn't spin. But that's a lot of work. So I got the glue on there, and since it's going to be painted, I really didn't want a glue ridge around the pole. And you can see I'm just smoothing that out, not being real careful to wipe it off, because I'm going to put several coats of paint on that base. You could even see the pencil lines that I left on there. So this is quick wood, and just a little ridge that's going to go around the little hole that I left up in the top there on the saddle. When I put that, the drill wandered just a little bit. It wasn't real clean. So I'm going to come back and contour this into the saddle. And at this point, I don't know what I was doing, but it started to get hard. Must be really hot in the studio. And I just barely made it, getting that quick wood to go in there. So I'm going to scrape it down off the pole, because I intend to leave that pole unpainted. It will get some lacquer or poly finish on there, clear poly. And now I'm just feathering it down into the saddle. I was real pleased with the way this guy came out. I like the shape, and I like the colors that he ended up. So there he is. He's ready to go to paint, and you won't get to see that because it's too painful. So last but not least, I'm going to go ahead and put my signature on this. Jordy talks about it. I've talked about it before. I think you should sign all of these things. And if for no other reason, that someday, if you get lucky and your great grandkids and you're famous for your wood carvings, they can reap the rewards of having your name on there and signed by the maker. It's kind of neat to go back. I can pull up some carvings, and you saw the carousel animals in the first one of this that I did 20 years ago. The ones that were kept and not sold. I used to put a month and the year on there. I've stopped doing the month. There is some downside, I guess, to this. If you have a shop or you're selling carvings and you're not quite famous yet, people, at least in my brain, would look at it and say, well, this one's sat in the shop for 3 years, hasn't sold, so maybe it should be cheaper. But the other side to that is maybe you liked it 3 years ago and now you don't, and then you think maybe it's time to sell a few of these because you'll end up with a lot. But I'll go ahead and burn my signature in, and then I will sign it. So there's all the painting when he's all done, and you can notice that I did a little bit of detail work on the base there. This guy is up in the Etsy shop if you think you might want to own something like this, and it all goes back to support the channel. So this has been Ben with Studio on the Lake. Thanks for watching. As always, comment, like, subscribe, and tell me if you'd like to see something else.